good morning. Grab your Bibles if you have them. Open up to 2 Samuel in the Old Testament. 2 Samuel chapter 6 is where we're going to be today. 2 Samuel 6. I'm so glad that you guys made it on this Time Change Sunday. You're here. And let's just agree that those that come here in about 25 minutes, we'll welcome them. Those doors swing open, people start streaming, and we'll just kind of just clap for them. We're going to pause in the message. Just prepare for that now. And I'll appreciate you guys being here today, especially spring break. Be praying for our youth on those mission trips. Really excited about them serving the Lord. Today, our series, Engaging God, we're 4 weeks in, and this is week 4. If you're taking notes, the title is The King. And we're going to be talking about King David specifically. Really, you can't talk about worship unless you talk about David. We see in Scripture, even in the New Testament, while worship changed, worship used to happen in the tabernacle with David. It was in the temple with Solomon. Now the temple is you and I. The New Testament says we are the temple of the Holy Spirit, that we're the place that God's presence dwells in us. He comes and dwells among us. And so while worship in that sense has changed, throughout this time, the Psalms have been kind of the songbook of the people who follow Jesus. And David is attributed, most of the Psalms are attributed to David, not all of them. And so we're going to look at King David. As a matter of fact, Colossians 3:16 says this in the New Testament: let the word of Christ, the message of Christ, dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another through wisdom, through psalms, hymns, songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your heart to God. We see similar things in Ephesians 5. And so there's this idea that we're going to speak to one another and sing with psalms and songs and spiritual songs. And David, if the Psalms are kind of the songbook of those who follow God and God's people, then David is kind of the worship leader. He's kind of the lead guy in worship. And so it makes sense for us to look at him and his life. And today, I want to zero in. We could focus on many aspects of King David, but today I want to talk about this story in 2 Samuel chapter 6, and I want to contrast, as Scripture does, David and Michal, his wife, how they engaged God and how they responded to the presence of God. So we're going to be looking at that contrast today in this story. Before we read the passage, let me give you some broader context. David is the king. He's married to Michal. Michal is the daughter of Saul. Just to give you some background, Saul was the first king of Israel, and he started out liking David, and David was his mighty warrior, and he, as a reward to his mighty warrior David, gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. So they got married, right? Then Saul decided he didn't like David and began to chase him and kill him because he was threatened by his kingdom. If you're not familiar with the story, during that time, he was estranged from his wife Michal, and Michal was given over into marriage to another man. Well, David became king. Saul died, and so Michal comes back to be David's husband. How many can say Jerry Springer? This is kind of the story, right? So now Michal and David are married. David is the king, and the Ark of the Covenant, which represents the presence of God in the Old Testament. The Ark of the Covenant, we see, and we don't have time to turn there, but in Isaiah 4, in 2 Kings 9, we see that the Ark of the Covenant was the Lord's throne on earth. It's where his presence resided. It was a place of divine revelation, the Ark of the Covenant. Exodus 25, number 7. It was also, it contained within it, the Ark, the written agreement from God and his people, the law of Moses, Exodus 25, Deuteronomy 10. So this was a very important piece of furniture. This isn't a coffee table. I mean, this is, you saw Raiders of the Lost Ark. Big deal, right? All right. So this is a big, big deal. And this is where the presence of God resided. And it had for years, since the prophet Samuel was a child, had resided in a residence. And this residence was very close to the border that they shared with the Philistines. And there was a fear that the Philistines would come and take the Ark of the Covenant. So they had to remove it. So David wanted the Ark of the Covenant closer, wanted the presence of God in Jerusalem. So he gathered some people up. They move it, and while they're moving it, something crazy happens. While they're moving it on a cart, literally, it jumbles and jostles, and a guy named Uzzah, everyone say Uzzah. If you need a name for your child, that's still available and very rarely used. Uzzah sticks up his hand, touches the ark, dies. Yeah, not one you want to read to the kids before bedtime. He dies. They are stricken with fear. What are we going to do? The ark just killed somebody. So they look at the closest place and they find the home of Obed-Edom and they say, let's dump it in Obed-Edom's house. They take the ark, drop it off at Obed, say, good luck, Obed, and they leave. 3 months later, they find out things are well with Obed-Edom, so they come to remove it again. And that's where we pick up the story. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 6, starting verse 12. Now King David was told, the Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God. So basically he didn't die. So David went down and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with what? Rejoicing. And when those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. David, wearing a linen ephod, danced before the Lord with all of his might, while he and the entire house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouts and with sounds of trumpets. Matter of fact, if you read in Chronicles, you'll see there was lyres and harps, and there was a lot of different instruments involved with this as well. Verse 16. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, watched from a window, and when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. And they brought the ark of the Lord, and they set it in its place outside inside the tent that David had pitched for it. That's important. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person, to the whole crowd of Israelites, both men and women, and all the people went to their homes. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, disrobing in the sight of the slave girls of his servants as any vulgar fellow would. David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone else from his house that he appointed me ruler of the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. Now, in this story, there's a clear contrast that the writer is wanting us to understand. There's David, and then there's Michal. There's the King David, and then there's Michal. And how they respond and engage with the presence of God in the ark, and how they don't. Now, the first thing, there's 3 observations we're going to make. Number 1 is this, if you're taking notes. David desired God's presence. There was a desire from David to have the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God with him. Psalms 27:4 describes this in some form or fashion from the Psalms. He says, one thing I ask of the Lord, David says, this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, to seek him in his temple. David sought to bring the ark of God, the presence of God, to Jerusalem. He ushered it in. He prepared a place for it to come. It said he pitched a tent. He pitched a tent. He prepared. It's coming to this place. He prepared a place and created a place for the presence of God to come and take up residence. By contrast, Michal, his wife, is at home watching from the window. She's not engaged. All of Israel, it's not just David, all of Israel is out there. I mean, this is what is happening. The Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God is coming here to reside with us. Come on, let's go. Let's usher it in. Let's rejoice. Let's celebrate. This is an awe-inspiring thing to have the presence of God here. And Michal is eating bonbons looking out the window. She's like disconnected. She doesn't want the presence of God. She's not interested in pursuing him or seeking his presence. She is arms crossed in front of the window looking at her husband coming down the road. See, if we want to engage God in worship, and that's the context of this series that we're talking about, if we're going to engage God in worship, we've got to begin to create, literally, we have to begin to create a place where he feels welcome. We have to desire his presence too. There's a difference in someone that feels welcome and someone who is unwelcome. Now, how do you know God can kind of come in when he's unwelcome at times, and he has before? Isn't that true? You're like, you know it's true. You're at the bar. Come on. God shows up. You're like, oh no. You're gossiping about that lady, and then God shows up. Or in the middle of something that, and then God, it's like, hey, God, you're not really welcome here. But he shows up, and he's like, I don't care. But then there's times that we just want, in worship, we need to create a place where God is welcome. How does that functionally work when we gather? Let me illustrate. Randy, would you come over here for a moment? I want to use one of our elders. Give Randy a hand. Randy, just thanks for being a guinea pig. Okay, Randy, congratulations. You get to be God today. All right?
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Yes. Better you God than me. All right. If anyone gets struck, it's you. So let's assume for a moment we come to worship, right? And we invite God here. We invite God to worship. So here's God, and we've welcomed him here into this place. How many of you guys want God to be here when we worship? Let's see your hands. Okay, we want God to be here. So we invite God here to be worship. But when he comes, we're like this. This is what this is not. Here God is. He's here to worship. He's here. We've invited him. But we're not open, and we're not desiring his presence. And even if we acknowledge his presence, as some do, we have a posture in our hands of, we don't want really you here. This is the way I would stand if a telemarketer or a door-to-door salesman were to come to my door. You know what I'm saying, Randy? They come to the door and you're like, hey, what's up? You're not getting past these arms. You know what I'm saying? Or you might even kind of creak the door open. But what's ironic and weird is we've invited God in, and then we're kind of cold shoulder to God, aren't we? Versus the different posture would be to receive God, wouldn't it? If the presence of God is here, I want to embrace God. I want him to come to me. I want to know that he's welcome here. He's welcome. I want to posture my heart inwardly and outwardly to a place of, God, I want you to come, and whatever you need to do in me and whatever you want to do in here, mi casa es su casa, right? This is the heart. This is the heart of us individually in our hearts. But here's reality. We can come into worship. This is true. We can come into worship and the presence of God is here, and we're so focused about how our spouse treated us. So rude on the way here. I wanted to come to third. She woke me up. We're sitting here thinking, what? I got a lot to do, man. I wanted to go golf, but man, I said I would come here. We're sitting here thinking, gosh, I just wish this would be different. We're thinking about all this stuff. And we have the King of Glory, the presence of God here to be welcome and desired. Here's one thing about David. David wanted the presence of God. He welcomed it. And he created a place. So here's the thing for us. Are we pitching a tent and creating a place in our hearts every time we come before him in worship for him to come and feel welcome? Let's give Randy a hand. Thank you, Randy. David, he desired God's presence. Now, if I took a poll and said, do you desire God's presence? You are a good Christian Sunday morning. You come on spring break weekend and you come on time on daylight saving Sunday. You're like above the rest. And I guarantee you, we took a poll, you'd say, yes, I desire God's presence. Here's the reality. Whether you say that or not, does your posture and on Sunday morning, is it express itself in a way of, God, I want you to come. You're welcome in my heart. You're welcome to rule my world. You're welcome to rebuke me. You're welcome to inhabit the praises of people. I want you here. Don't go anywhere else. I want you here. I've created a place for you. I've pitched a tent for you. You go to someone's house where you're welcome and unwelcome. Like you come in and like, hey, yeah, you invited me over, but they were like, yeah, man, it's a mess in there, And you're like, yeah, but you called and said you wanted me to come. You're like, yeah, but I was just, maybe next week. Shut the door. Versus come in. We've created a space for you. There's a bed for you. There's food for you. Matter of fact, we took all the toys off the floor just for you. We want you to feel welcome here. This is the heart posture that we should have before God in worship. It's the heart posture of David. He desired God's presence. Michael, arms folded, looking at the window, saying, I'm not going after the presence of God. I'm not going out. I'm bitter about the past. I'm bitter about what happened. Why did this happen to me? Maybe even some of it very legitimate, but she says, I don't care about the presence of God. David desired the presence. The second thing that we see, David revered and celebrated God's presence. He didn't just want it. He revered it and he celebrated it. Reverence we see the reverence expressed here in the little details. That there were right steps made according to the law of Moses. The first time he moved it, when Uzzah died, he just went down with the cart, threw the ark on the cart, let's move this thing. And you know what? That's not what the law of Moses said about moving it. The law said Levites were to carry the ark by hand. There was to be a sacrifice after 6 steps. The priest is to wear a linen ephod. What did he do? He had a linen ephod on. The Levites were there. They sacrificed to God. He began to obey God's word. Why? Because there was a reverence to him. There was a fear. In our worship, there should be a reverence to God, recognizing in a holy fear that the God of all creation is here, that he has all the earth is in his hand. All power and authority and dominion exists within who he is. And there's a reverence for that. There's an acknowledgement that if he says something, it goes. He's the king. He's the Lord. He's not here just to simply kind of be here for us or kind of pep us up. We're here for him because he's a big deal. There's a reverence. And so they were acknowledged as reverence, but they also celebrated. There was music and singing and dancing. Verse 12 said they moved it in his presence, ushered in his presence with rejoicing. Verse 14 says, David, wearing a linen ephod, danced before the Lord with all of his might. All that he was. I was reading this story to some of our worship leaders in a worship conference not long ago. And when I was reading through this again for the first time, although I've read it many times, I just began to wonder, what have I ever done with all my might? Have you ever asked that question? Like, what have I've done a lot of things well, but what have I ever done with everything that I am? My mind, my will, my emotions. In high school I played basketball. All my time, energy, effort, emotions, it went into it. It was like almost everything I did. I really did with all my might. To get Kayla to marry me, that took an effort, y'all. I was going after it. I was, emotionally, spiritually. I was trying to work out and look better. I was just whatever it took to get her. And it worked. And so what have you ever done with all your might? And I just think about this because I'm generally a pretty laid back person, kind of balanced. Let's not too much over here, not too much there. And that's, we kind of celebrate balance. We don't celebrate excess. Matter of fact, we make fun of people who take themselves too seriously or others. Isn't that true? People that are a little over the top, too intense, we kind of make fun of them. I remember we were at birthing class when the twins Kayla was pregnant with the twins. And we're there in the birthing Lamaze kind of class, and they're like, okay, you're the coach, so we're going to get on the floor and do this exercise. I want you to look at her in the eyes, and I want you to go, so I'm like, okay, I'm kind of getting that down, and then I look around, and man, there's some serious dudes in there. Some of these dudes are down with their wife, and they're like, come on, babe, I got you, me and you. They're intensely looking at her and going, and she's like, The ladies are like, yeah, okay. And I'm watching all this, and I start getting tickled. And so I start getting tickled. I start kind of laughing a little bit. When you're laughing, you can't breathe right. So I'm kind of laughing. Kayla's like, don't you dare. I'm like, I'm sorry, babe. And so I'm like, and then she starts laughing, and then we're laughing. And then the trainer looks at us like, you guys are so disrespectful. We cannot stop laughing. Literally kicked out of the class. Like, get out of here. We don't want you anymore. It's like they're so intense about this. It's breathing. How can a human forget to breathe? We like people that take themselves too seriously. Here's some people that take themselves, like what they love too seriously. Duke fans. All right, they played last night. Duke and North Carolina. Look at this. He's throwing the ball at that guy. Those guys took off their shirt and painted themselves blue. How many of you guys are doing that at your next home game, right? Not many of you, because you like to look at those people and go, oh, no way. Look at that. That's crazy. These people are real intense for a different reason. They got real mad at somebody. Let's go to the next one. They got real mad. Look at that. They're at a basketball game. See those two people yelling at him? How many of you know, like just looking at that, you're a little embarrassed for them? How many, they checked out the internet the next day, were like, oh, I was too intense. Right? Just a little. This lady, she's really intense. Every time I see her, the former Speaker of the House, every time she's just, I just come, dude, chill out. It's fine. We're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. This guy's intense too, like, kind of the smolder. You know what I mean? Like, hey, just intense on a different level, like creepy intense. Kind of a creepy intense. You get that? This person's real pumped to meet the leader of the free world. Can you imagine? He's like, oh! Like, I would hope that if I met the leader of the free world, I would act like I'm cool. You know, it's like I'd be kind of just chill a little bit. That guy, no way. He's looking at that the next day going, oh no, that really happened. It's too intense, right? Just too intense. There's just all these people that are intense. Here's the deal. We do this spiritually. Spiritually, someone gets excited in worship. Somebody raises their hands, someone starts getting a little move going on. Somebody shout, you go, whoa, easy, killer. Don't get too excited about this God thing. Don't get too excited about worship. Don't get too excited about all this. Let's just kind of be balanced. This is what Michael did. Michael, literally, verse 16. Says this. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. Verse 20, when David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him. She came to the yard. Have you ever had a fight in the yard? Come on, it just means you haven't been married long enough. That's all that is. Or you don't have a yard, you know, like that's fine. No judgment. She comes out in the yard. She comes out to meet them. How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, disrobing in the sight of the slave girls, of the servants, as any vulgar fellow would do. You embarrassed and wrapped up in herself, and here she is embarrassed of him, and she's pointing out sarcastically what he did. She has not celebrated God's presence. She hasn't been excited about the presence of God coming, the Ark of the Covenant being there. She was embarrassed. She was self-absorbed, self-focused, and possibly jealous of God's relationship with David. Listen, if you give your all to God, if you really worship him with all your might, someone will despise you. You'll be despised by someone. It'll be possibly family members, close friends, people that look at you and go, man, I don't really know about this commitment, this passion that you have for God and his presence. And it'll be cloaked in terms of method or contrived intent. People will disparage you for worshiping God and his presence. clothed, or maybe you shouldn't worship in that way. You're kind of too intense for me. Maybe you don't need to really clap your hands like that or raise your hands. Maybe you don't really need to engage God or be excited about the fact that he's here or moved to a place of emotion. Just kind of keep it all in. Or maybe you think contrived motivation or contrived intent, the idea that, well, they may think, well, they just have other motives. They want people to think they're real spiritual. When the reality is there is going to be people that despise you. If you take God seriously and you take worship of him seriously and you really desire his presence as David is and you revere his presence and you celebrate his presence, you're going to be weird. Look at your neighbor, say, I'm weird. Go ahead and tell him. Tell him, then respond to him. I knew that this whole time. I've been trying to tell you you're weird for years. You know what? He's called us a holy people, meaning we're set apart. You're going to be different. If you're not okay with being different, you're not going to be okay following Jesus. You're not going to be okay worshiping him. Because in a culture where everyone was worshiping multiple gods, they worshiped a one God you could not see. And they were laughed at and scoffed. Revering his presence. Celebrating his presence. Thirdly, David was unashamed of God's presence. Verse 21 and 22. David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler of the Lord's people. I will celebrate the Lord. I will become, listen to this, even more undignified than this. I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by the slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor. Unshaken by Michal's rebuke, David feared disappointing God more than disappointing Michal. He feared and revered God more than mankind. Listen, two of the biggest obstacles to us being able to fully worship the Lord with all of our might, with all that we are misplaced fear and misplaced value. These are two things we've got to get over. Misplaced fear, misplaced value. Let me explain. We fear people more than we fear God many times. We just do. We fear what they'll think. We just have a fear of other people. We have a fear of our own reputation. We have a fear of a lot of different things, but we don't rightly fear God. And we value our reputation and people's perception of us more than we value God's perception of us and his reputation. As followers of Jesus, as worshipers of God, we should think God's reputation is more important than ours. As followers of Jesus, as worshipers of God, we should value what he thinks of us more than what anyone else thinks of us. Whether it's our spouse or our kids or our co-workers or our longtime friends. You know, we have this idea that just maybe if we worship God and we fear him and all of these things, then there's going to be right worship there. But if we don't get over these obstacles of fear and misplaced value, misplaced fear and misplaced value, we'll never really be able to worship God with all that we are. We'll never be able to really worship God in spirit and in truth. He tells Michal, I'm going to become even more undignified than this, he says. Now, I want to finish this today, and I want us to have just a moment where we can worship God together. And we're going to reprise one of these songs and sing together. But I think Isaiah said it this way. I love the way Isaiah said it. I am undone. I am ruined when he finds himself in the presence of God. There's something about God's presence. There's something about being with him that just makes you absolutely unashamed. It ruins you in a good way. What would happen to us? Here's the question. What would happen to us if we individually in our families and together as a gathering of believers in Jesus, if we desired his presence in worship? What if we created a place every Sunday where he's welcome? Where, we're not begrudgingly here. We're not begrudgingly in his presence. but he's here and we want him to be here, and he has full access to us in our hearts. The only way for us as a church to have that environment is for us as individuals express that to God. Because all a church is a group of folks together. That's what a church is. It's not a building. It's not a place or a location. The church is us. And if our church is going to be a people that engages God in worship, what would happen if we desired him in a way that we created a space where he was welcome? What would it look like if we revered and celebrated his presence? In our gatherings, there's moments just where we just awed at who he is and his magnificence and his power, his grace. And we celebrated with joyful singing and dancing and praise to our God who's totally worth it. What would it look like if we were unashamed of his presence? Sometimes we're so good at suppressing our emotions, suppressing our expectations and all these things that we're never ever really able to unashamedly just come into his presence. You know what? You may have to come sometimes up the altars and just kneel and worship. You may have to turn in your seat one time and just get on your face before God. Maybe times you need to just physically open yourself up to the Lord and go, you know what, God, I want you to be welcome here. You're welcome. Now, we got to be careful because it's not about form. There's churches that got lots of dancing and singing and celebrating, and they're not welcoming the presence of God at all. They're welcoming themselves and celebrating themselves. Everybody's different. God's created you and me different. That's a beautiful thing. But he should be welcome all the same. Welcomed, revered, celebrated, unashamed. What would happen if we really worshiped with all of our might? The way those Duke fans celebrated. What would it look like if when God showed up, it was like we'd met the President of the United States? What would it be like if God, when he showed up, we just were amazed? What would happen if we valued and feared him and his reputation, not our people and perceptions of those people? Here's what I would propose to you. I think we'd be men and women after God's own heart like David. I think we'd find ourselves individually and family-wise and as a church as a place where he is welcome. So I'd like you to stand with me if you would. And as we prepare to worship God, just close our time together in one worship song, I'm going to ask you this question. What area of that, the three areas we're talking about, what is he working on you in? Lord, I just pray right now that you would help us. That you would help us, God, come. And you would evaluate within our own heart, God, areas where maybe we need to grow in celebrating and revering you. Maybe we need to just desire your presence. The truth of the matter, we come into your presence and we're just trying to catch up. We say we welcome you, but we're not really welcoming you. And we want to create a space, a place for you to come and be with us. And maybe, God, we've been ashamed of your presence for too long, fearful of what others think and say. Lord, I just pray that you would deal with us in that, confront us in that, and let us move in a place where we're growing and worshiping you and engaging you together with believers. For these next few moments, we want to engage you, God.